Welcome to Lead Like Lions, the podcast designed for men who aspire to lead with purpose, faith, and courage. Together we'll learn how to balance strength and humility, courage and compassion as we prepare to live out our faith authentically. My name's Philip.
And my name is Jason. Join us this week as we explore the journey of becoming a lionhearted leader. Today's episode is Embracing Masculinity, Strength, and Vulnerability. We'll be going over redefining masculinity, talking about the strength in vulnerability, giving some practical steps that you can take to embrace both strength and vulnerability. And of course, we'll be going over the biblical foundations of strength and vulnerability. Today's society, everybody's talking about what is masculinity? What is a gender? What does this all mean? And there is so much confusion. There's conflict over what's going on with the traditional sense, right? There's this idea that there is no such thing as masculinity. It's just send it out the window, right?
Right.
There's so much conflict over this word right now. I mean, people are chopping off genitalia. People are going to drastic routes to get this concept out of society. They call it toxic. They call it whatever else it is. And people keep going back to this understanding of what the traditional sense is of masculinity, strength, stoicism, that idea that I've got to be that John Wayne type of guy, right? And vulnerability doesn't have a place in either one of those, right? There's a pretending to be vulnerable, or there's a complete shield against vulnerability. But today we want to challenge that. We want to bring some truth to that being a man isn't about just appearing to be strong or appearing to be something.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's redefine that. You know, we can't just be taking what society gives us and just being like that. That's it. Because like you said, they're just telling us that we're not valuable anymore. You know, just cut off your genitalia because women can do the job that you're doing. If you want to be whatever you want to be, you can. So we get rid of that strength in masculinity. And we're not just talking about, you know, that physical strength, which is awesome and great because it helps protect your family. But we're also talking about that mental resiliency and that spiritual resiliency as well. I mean, we can look at David in the Bible and how he became a masculine man. As we talked about in last episode, he was just herding his sheep. And then next thing, he's fighting against the biggest man in the Bible. He's fighting against the Goliath. And now he's, at this point, a king. And he still has those issues with masculinity and the way that he's journeying through his life and learning what it's like to be now in that state of power. Now in that state of responsibility.
Right. This guy who was able to stand up against the giant was able to stand up against the whole army. There he is. And we see the other side of masculinity. Okay, well, now that I have power and authority, let's take from others. Right. And we're going to talk about what being strong and vulnerable does to help protect you from both ends of that spectrum. Being that too strong of a guy and being that person is just a pushover. Right? Vulnerability isn't about being weak. Vulnerability is about really establishing that inner strength.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if we're getting pushed over in society, then we can't lead who we're supposed to lead. And if we're overbearing and we're controlling too much and we're not letting the people around us continue to grow, then we're hindering everyone else around us. And as men, we shouldn't be hindering everyone else around us. We should be building everyone else around us. And again, we need to lead. And if we're having that machismo mindset, you can see what happens in society with a lot of kids. They're like, oh, I don't want to show any more emotions because my dad told me stop showing emotions. And then they pass that on to their kids. And they're like, well, shut up and stop showing emotions. And then they hit them and they're like, well, now that generation has problems with showing emotions. And then we have the other side, which is just like, show all of your emotions, be weak, show your emotions, cry in front of everybody, do this, do that. And it's like, it's okay because being a man doesn't matter anymore.
That's right. There's just too much confusion over this topic. There's too much of a negative connotation of this word, right? So we're going to start out by exploring the duality of leadership as illustrated through Christ. What did he show us, right? He came as the perfect man, right? He's the second Adam. He came reincarnated, God on earth in the flesh. And as God came, he came to give us an example, show us a way. So let's look at him and let's look at what Christ did as the ultimate leader. John 4, as we were talking about earlier, as he approached the woman in the well, there's two big things that happened here, right? And we want to show that being a man is not about being strong, being better, being anything other than what God has called you to be. And that means you got to be courageous in telling the truth. When Jesus came up to the woman in the well, he boldly confronted her. I mean, he spoke truthfully to her. He spoke truth and life into her. He's like, hey, listen, this is who you are, right? I know what you've been doing. You've been sinning, right? He very clearly pointed that out to her. But he did it in a special way, right? He showed that truth about her life, but he also showcased his strength as a leader by confronting her and her sins and her lifestyle with grace and compassion.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to get from someone nowadays. They will confront you pretty quickly.
Right.
And they'll tell you why your opinion is not the truth because their opinion is truth. And they'll be like, you're wrong. And you get confronted.
Oh, yeah.
But you don't have a lot of people
on social media, right?
Oh, social media is just horrible for that. I mean, it's an echo chamber of everyone just telling you how you're wrong and how they're right. And that's hard to have mental strength when you're playing around on social media.
By the way, if you don't agree with us, you're wrong. We're right. We don't want to hear you.
You can leave the podcast now. Thanks for unsubscribing, all of that. No, but truly, Jesus showed that with grace, and he does it with a vulnerability too, by being honest. And I think one of the biggest vulnerabilities that Jesus took on is that incarnation of man. He came down into a mortal body that could be taken.
Yes.
And
we see he says that he poured out his deity, which is like, just poured out my authority, my strength, and all these things just for mankind.
Yeah. And that's
amazing.
It's such a crazy thing to think about. It's like, oh, the person who can never be killed, right? God said, I'm going to be willing to die and give that vulnerability. He's like, I'm going to let people beat me. I'm going to let people put the cross on my back, put the thorns on my head. That's vulnerable. But we move in and we talk about embracing that vulnerability.
Yeah, because as he showed us that sacrifice, we see a strength in that. That takes a lot of strength to put and take that upon yourself. Step into that. As he prayed in those last moments, as he was about to be handed over, as he was praying at the Garden of Gethsemane, it says he was sweating blood. I don't know about you, but I've never sweat blood. I've been through some stuff. I've been blown up. I've been shot. I've experienced a lot in this world. I've never sweat blood. That's insane.
Yeah,
it takes some strength to face all that. And he didn't have to do any of that.
No, yeah, he could have stopped all of it from happening because not only was he vulnerable at that time, but he was also all powerful and all knowing. He knew exactly what was coming next.
That's right.
And he stuck with it. That mental fortitude that he took on and was like, I know that I'm about to be killed. I'm about to have the life drained from my body in a horrible and painful experience.
Come on.
I mean, crucifixion is one of the worst things that can happen, especially back then. That was a horrible way to die. And he's like, I know it's going to happen, but I'm going to embrace that.
And as he shared that vulnerability with his disciples, what did that do? As the leader for those guys, man, he built tremendous trust with them. They're like, wow, not only am I sitting here with my Lord and my God, but he is relating with me on a very personable level, right? That just builds an amazing amount of trust. When we are able to share our struggles, our doubts, our fears, and connect with people on that level, we realize that, hey, we're all human, We're all in this thing called life together. And that allows us to be connected in strength.
And what a great way to show trust too. He could have not taken on the cross to bear, but he decided to do that and show not only his disciples, who still questioned him even after he was resurrected. They had to race to the tomb to figure out, like, was it really Jesus or is that the gardener, right? That's such a way to build trust. And I mean, think about that. Which one of your best friends has done anywhere close to sacrificing themselves to build that trust? I mean, I know my best friends have broken trust, and I've broken trust with my best friends just because we're human. But he didn't leave them. Even in his dying breath, he was with them. And that transparency that he brought before the crucifixion.
Oh, yeah, when he shared with them over and over again. He's like, hey, by the way,
I'm going to die.
They're like, well, what does that quite mean? I'm not sure.
I'm going to die. And in 3 days, rise again. And they're like, how can we interpret that? You can't. That's pretty black and white.
And this is actually a tough one to take on. And I've experienced this in my own life, where we are afraid to show that vulnerability. We're afraid to be transparent. And this has been a barrier, and I think it's a barrier for a lot of guys in finding that companionship that they need. Mm-hmm. They're like, well, if I open myself up, I'm just opening myself up for hurt, disappointment. We think, man, what is everybody going to think about me, right? We worry about all these things. But once we open ourselves up to transparency, that's when we are able to truly connect with people and build relationships. That's where we limit ourselves, I think, a lot of times, is on that transparency.
Yeah, absolutely.
What we keep in the dark is what condemns us eventually, right? All of those things that are in the dark recesses of our mind and our heart, if we keep them to ourselves, they will eventually rot us.
Yeah.
Right? And whether we're giving them to the Lord or not, it's always a good thing to have somebody who you can share that with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And not only being vulnerable in being transparent, you should be empathetic back to them. Understand that, like, hey, I know you're not perfect. I know that there's going to be some things that are going to challenge you mentally and physically, but I'm going to be here with you through that.
Imagine the strength in that. It's easy to see. When somebody's just beating their chest, yelling out, having a temper tantrum like a 2-year-old, there's nothing strong in that. And I want to share this picture of the lion, right? The lion that's sitting there after his kill. He's tired. It's been a long day in the sun. The jackals are coming in. The birds are coming in, picking at his meat, at his kill, right? He's got a gazelle sitting there in front of him. And you got the hyenas coming in. And like, look at this lion. He's exhausted, made his kill. They come in, the lion's just laying there. They'll get their little pickings in. They'll come in closer. They'll mess with them. They might even nibble in his tail. You watch it all the time. You're like, why doesn't the lion do anything? Well, they're not a threat to him, right? He knows what they're there for. He knows who he is. He's like, they're not going to get my main course. I know I'm good. And having that assurance allows him to understand what they're doing. He's assured in what he's doing. He's like, hey, I'm fed. I'm hungry. I've got my kingdom. I got my family. I've got my pride. I'm good to go. And being a man is not shutting yourself off from everybody, but being assured where you're at so that you can open yourself up to them. Having that assurance in yourself allows us to better be understanding and empathetic towards others.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the first things that we need to do in that step to being vulnerable is understanding our vulnerabilities. Again, I think a lot of the time we hide our vulnerabilities even from our wives.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, my wife doesn't need to know that. Well, she married you. You're now one person.
It's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
Those are closest to you need to know. It's not even a question of like, should I tell her? Or if it's a vulnerability that you have, it means that it's a vulnerability that she has as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not sharing that with her. You're actually putting her in a very bad position.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So first, what we want to say is self-reflection. Reflect on what your vulnerabilities are and where they come from. I know for me, I have vulnerabilities in my childhood. I've had vulnerabilities in past relationships with women. And those are things I had to identify to be able to lead my wife properly and not be emasculated by those things.
Right.
And be able to be honest with her and be like, hey, here's my most vulnerable times in my life. Let me tell you them and trust that you're going to listen to them with empathy and you're going to understand and you're going to forgive me for those things and love me still.
Amen.
Which I think a lot of us, we fear that we're going to lose that love. Be like, oh yeah, they might be able to forgive me because maybe they did the same things, but maybe they won't love me as much. And that's a scary thing too. So first thing, take a step back, and whatever relationship you're in with your best friend, with your wife, with whoever it is, your kids too. Parents.
Brothers and sisters.
Absolutely. And just be like, where did my vulnerabilities start? What are they? Mm-hmm. And then we can go from there and actually share those, like we said already. Share those with the people closest around you. Start sharing those stories.
So think about these steps, guys. First and foremost, get that self-reflection in. Next, share that story, your story with them. Don't be afraid of your experiences, right? Your life story has purpose, right? Knowing that even your struggles, even the times where you've made mistakes, right? Now, if you're not having that growth mindset, that story may sound terrible, right? If you don't know Christ, that story may be a tragic story. I know that was my story before I found Christ, right? Think about what failures and challenges you have in your life. Share those with your team, your family, those you care about. A good leader knows how to take on adversity, meet those challenges, and then they want to share that. We want to help others through that.
Yeah.
So take the time to do that. You can inspire others and foster some amazing, good, deep connections with people by doing that.
Yeah, encourage these other people around you to speak about their vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Because if you're the only one being vulnerable, you might be in a one-sided relationship. Because if they're still holding back,
come on,
do they not trust you? Are they still too worried that you might not love them anymore or you might not be their friend?
You cannot lead by example, right? You can't expect somebody to be vulnerable with you if you're not encouraging them and showing them how to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right?
So after you step into that light and you're like, I've recognized it, I've now said it, encourage them to say it so you can build a better relationship. When me and my wife have been vulnerable with each other, we go from maybe a small argument to, I understand why you said this. I know you didn't mean to hurt me with that, which I think is a big thing that we actually talk about is trust me that I'm not trying to hurt you when I start saying something. Yeah. It's like, hey, it's just how I react. It's how I respond. I promise that I love you. And this is because I care, not because I'm trying to hurt you. And have that gratitude of those people around you who are willing to be vulnerable. Be thankful for those people that you have, those friends. I mean, I would say we've been pretty vulnerable with each other.
Absolutely.
In a lot of our aspects. I think we've known each other for a little less than 2 years, but I would say I know more about you than I do some of my friends who are non-believers, because they hold that in reserve because it's a scary thing and they don't think that they need to tell me,
right? Because
they feel, well, if I hold it back, then no one has to deal with it except me, and I'm going to be the only one who has to deal with that.
Men are not taught how to share their feelings very well, right? And it's good to understand, like, hey, our feelings are born from something, right? Understanding what our feelings are, being able to share our feelings, even though good chances are, yes, it's true, that nobody really cares at the level that you might want them to.
Yeah.
Right? But if you find yourself in that position, open yourself up, share with others, and you might realize that, hey, people tend to care. Might be just the fact that you're not sharing enough.
Yeah, like, oh, these people don't care about me. They don't ever ask. And it's like, have you said anything to them? Have you been like,
have you opened up?
Yeah, have you opened up at all? And again, we've talked, it's a two-way streak. Yeah, if they're not saying anything either, then hopefully they find the courage to open up to you, but don't wait for them to do it. Be that leader and be the first person to open up.
If you're opening up to somebody routinely and they're not opening up to you, you may have yourself somebody who is a Russian spy. I mean, these guys are like ice cold. You got to be careful there. So not only do you want to encourage vulnerability in others, next thing that you want to do is practice gratitude and humility. And that really opens us up. When we focus in not on what we're worried about, not our hangups, not our doubts, not our worries and fears, we practice focusing in on what we're thankful for and we're grateful for, we're no longer in a position of facing our fears and facing those things that we're concerned about. We're focusing in on those things that we're grateful for. It is a powerful thing to be able to go to the God of the universe and say, thank you for your breath.
Yes.
Even if you think you've got nothing to be thankful for, I'm telling you, you do. You may not see it right now. I promise you, you have something to be thankful for. And if you don't, consider reaching out to somebody who believes in Jesus Christ and ask them why. Because it's a powerful thing to know how much our God of the universe loves us. Find yourself a friend or a mentor who can support you and thank God for what he's given you.
Yes.
It may not be much. You may be in a position where it's all taken away from you. But no matter what you have, it could always be worse.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the last thing that we want to say about what steps you can take is find that person that holds you accountable.
Yeah.
One of my best friends, I've told you this story before, one of my best friends, he came out to me and he's like, hey, I think I'm gay. And he's like, but I want you to be 100%, do not hold back about anything that you are feeling. Because at that time, he was still going to the church with me. And then he's like, man, okay, I think I'm gay. And he's like, I want you to be 100%. And I said, okay. He found that accountability in me. And I'm so grateful that he knew that I would hold him accountable. And I was like, man, I don't agree in your lifestyle. I love you. You are my brother. And I want to watch you succeed. I want to see you there in heaven with me, but you need to turn from your ways. And it wasn't that I stopped loving him. It wasn't that I turned away from him. I held him accountable. And he's like, why am I wrong? What do you think I'm doing that is wrong? And I was like, okay, let's talk about it. Let's get together. Let's spend time together. Let's be with that person who is struggling to find their masculinity, right? Especially in that story, he was struggling to find that masculinity in understanding who he was. He was confused. And that's no thanks to society just eating away at him, attacking him daily, whether he sees it or not. And he's like, oh, okay, maybe I'm just gay. And that's a horrible way that society has treated him, to where he's like, oh, I can't find anyone. I'm just never going to be with anyone. The only way I can turn is to homosexuality. And he's like, tell me what's wrong. And I was like, okay, let's do it. Let's hold each other accountable.
And that takes courage. Instead of saying, well, things aren't working out, I'm going to find that, and in many cases, not saying everybody, I'm going to find an easy way out.
Yeah.
Right? We can look at that homosexuality. We can look at it in many different ways that we can live our lives. Right? And if we seek out what society has to say about it, we're going to fall short. So let's take a look at what the biblical foundations of strength and vulnerability are, starting with 2 Corinthians 12:9. Right? Paul says, he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. This verse speaks volumes about how our weakness can showcase God's strength. And how his strength is made perfect in our weakness. As we let go of ourselves, the more that we allow him to take over, the stronger we are in him. That takes a lot of vulnerability, right? That takes a lot of trust.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful place to be. If you find yourself in a situation ever where you're facing eternity, you will, by the way, because we're all going to face that time. You're going to have to ask yourself, what did you place your trust in? Everybody's got to do that, right? What was my purpose on this earth? Don't get to that place all alone. Don't get to that place and say, boy, I wish I had more friends. I wish I had a closer family. I wish I had stayed married. I wish I had done something more with my life. I wish I had not wasted my life on material things, as we often see in America.
Start that now. Start building those relationships now. Enjoy them while they're still here, because they won't last forever.
Absolutely. And it starts with being vulnerable with Christ.
As we wrap up today's episode, we just want to challenge you to identify an area in your life that you can embrace both that strength and vulnerability. Whenever you have something come up this week, think about those things. How can I be vulnerable? How can I be like, okay, this is where I fall short, but this is where God takes over, and show that strength. And don't say, oh, I know I'm weak, but I'm also strong. Say, I know I'm weak, but God is strong. But God is strong. Give that back to him. Don't hold that on to yourself. Give the glory back to God. Reach out to your friends. Share your struggles. Tell them what's going on. And just start building that brotherhood, building that relationship, not only with Christ by being vulnerable, but by building that with your brothers and your sisters in your community, your mom, your dad, whoever it is. Open up to someone and build that better relationship.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Lead Like Lions as we explored embracing masculinity, strength, and vulnerability.
If you found value in today's conversation, please give it a moment to subscribe and review the podcast. Connect with us on Instagram at lead.like.lions or on Facebook at Lead Like Podcast. Your feedback helps us reach more men who are ready to step into their calling.
Join us next week as we dive into overcoming fear, the courage to lead. And as always, lead with passion, live with purpose, and serve with courage. That was good.
Skibbity-bottom-bottom.